if we're talking about mental health, then it's really, really helpful, in fact, essential to look at the bigger picture, which is to say society. Society being not just an organization of people, but a mental map of the world, a virtual reality. So it's not just a bunch of human bodies that comprise society, no matter how many million of them there are. It's the thoughts, the thought-created world that everyone agrees on. So once any number of us agree on a picture of the world, the reinforcement that this automatically brings into play makes it very, very hard to question it, because were we to question the map or theory of things that everyone else agrees with, it's kind of like we're insulting them. There's a big lashback. It's kind of like we're not just being um, curious about stuff and thinking freely, we're actually being delinquent. We're being heretical, even though we won't use the word. It's the same feeling. Nobody likes a heretic. No one likes someone who takes it upon themselves to go against what we have all tacitly decided is true. So that doesn't go down well at all. So what this means is that we are predisposed not to question the societal version of truth. We're not predisposed to at all question what we have all collectively agreed, without even knowing that we've collectively agreed it, because it's done implicitly rather than explicitly. So that only leaves one other possibility, and that is to focus on the individual. Say, well, the fault, whatever it is, in the case of if there is some kind of mental health difficulty going on, well, the fault is in the individual. Maybe they had bad experiences, maybe they learned bad stuff, bad ways of coping from their parents, maybe their DNA is dodgy, or maybe the brain is not so great. So it kind of comes down to blame the brain or blame the genes and ignore the big picture, because it's not popular to point at the big picture, obviously, because no one wants to rock the boat. And you get in trouble if you rock the boat. You lose credibility. If you're an academic, you won't be listened to. You lose your voice. If you're a professional, you lose your career. So all these incentives, which have nothing to do with truth, but they're very practical, and even though they've got nothing to do with universal truths of whatever nature, but merely about habits of the mind that we've collectively fallen into, or culture, they're still very, very important, because we can't ignore them because of the practical side of it. No one wants to be excluded, because it feels bad to be excluded. No, it's hard to get on in that case. So there's reasons for us looking for the cause of mental health disturbances in the individual. It's just an easier place to look. There's less trouble. People will clap us on the back and say, "Oh, good, you're doing some research there. That's great." We should be doing research into society, or at least looking at society, because society is a very strange thing and we don't realize it. It's a very peculiar and stilted and distorted thing, and we don't realize it. So what we can say about our way of looking at things is to say that our particular socialized way of looking at things, which is our society, which is our culture, what we could say to try and bring some light to it is to say, well, we've got a kind of a weird kind of predicament in that we have put all our money on trickery, on tricks. Maybe trickery is the wrong word to use, but on tricks, definitely. So what we could say is that there's two ways to make our way through life, or make our way through the world. And one of them is just to take everything on the chin, take it as it comes, kind of like be honest about everything and just say, okay, we can call that being, because the only thing that allows us to take it on the chin and to not try to evade or avoid or fix everything that we come across that doesn't agree with us or that we don't agree with, is to develop being. So being is like, it's our inner strength. Being is in our inner strength. Without it, without being, we have no inner strength. We just have reactivity. And reactivity is another way of talking about tricks, because if I'm reacting against something and I've got a clever way of reacting, I might be able to get one up on it for a while. And that's the whole point. It's all, like Alan Watts says, it's all one-upmanship. How do I beat this? How do I beat that? And this is deep, deep in our thinking. We're always talking about beating things, of course. How do I beat it? How do I beat it? And we're talking about after a long battle with this, with this illness or that illness. So it's all very, very combative. And what that means is that, okay, so it's all about the fight, the struggle, fighting the good fight, and that's good because we can all kind of say, yeah, and get a kind of whip up some motivation that way. But the flip side of this idea that it's all about fighting is that if we can't win out, then that means we're a loser. It means we should have fought better, but we didn't. We should have done the combat better. We should have battled harder and longer, but we didn't. So it's inherently slanted towards making us feel bad, towards us feeling like losers or failures. This is absolutely implicit in our controlling stroke fixing mentality. Because the thing that we can never allow ourselves to see is that this cannot be fixed, this cannot be controlled. There's some things can't be fixed, there's some things can't be controlled. Most things can't be fixed, most things can't be controlled. What we can control is a very small little domain, and it's trivial. It's not, we can control it. I can control the design on my wallpaper because I can strip, not that anyone has wallpaper anymore, but I can go and buy some wallpaper that I like. I can control my clothes. I can have a blue t-shirt. I can have a pink t-shirt if I want. I can control that, but it's trivial. It's a trivial domain. So what we do is we ignore the fact that it's trivial. Being in a controlling culture, we cannot allow ourselves to know that the controlling only works for minor details. It doesn't work for the really big things on the whole. And in mental health, it really, really isn't the road to go down, being clever at controlling. We're basically looking at things from the point of view of the self or the ego, which gets all its power from its belief, a false belief, ultimately, that it can get its own way and achieve goals that it wants to achieve. So we can't ever allow ourselves to see that there's a big, big question mark over that capacity to control, the perceived self-efficacy, as your man says. We can't ever question that because that opens up a can of worms. So we're kind of committed to this battling approach, the struggling approach, this we're going to beat it approach. And we don't have to beat it just by pure brute strength. We can beat it by cleverness, by trickiness. So that's where we've put our money, on the trickiness, on the cleverness. And our cleverness has brought us many things. We can make plastics. We can make carbon steel out of soft pig iron. We can do all these things. And we can legitimately do them in as much as we actually can do them without any immediate lashback or any immediate counterproductivity arising with it. But the difference between our cleverness and the outside world, which we can to a certain extent say, yeah, it's legitimate to be clever and learn these clever tricks, such as mixing concrete or extracting aluminium from aluminium ore. All these things are clever tricks. I'm not trying to say that they're empty or useless or foolish, but just that they are tricks, and as such, they're not the whole story. They're a part of the story. They can be useful, but when it comes to mental health, they're not really so useful at all. And this is a fact that we're absolutely blind to, because as I was saying, we don't want to learn about this. But the basic point that I'm trying to remember and come back to is that there are these two things: being on the one hand, and cleverness or clever tricks on the other. Now, we have opted, without realizing that we've opted, to go entirely in the direction of clever tricks. It's all about clever tricks. We're so intoxicated with the cleverness of our tricks and the apparent usefulness and results of our tricks that we put all of our money on it. And we absolutely have this at this point in time, in this world that we live, in this culture, all of the money is on cleverness and none of it is on being. We don't say, oh, well, being doesn't matter, we don't need being, because it's an unconscious shift of our attention. We're just being taken up by the apparent advantage, the apparent opportunity for profit that our cleverness. We've got these clever monkey brains, and well, I suppose we are hyped up, souped up, enhanced super monkeys. But we're more than that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use the capacity that we have to be super monkeys and be tricky. But I'm just saying we do need something, that we do need this other thing, because without being, it's all pointless. Because tricks without being is meaningless. Being ultimately means the same thing as existing. So if I am to exist, to genuinely exist, rather than just think that I exist in some kind of mental world that we've all created, I have to obtain being. Because who is the being? The being is the being. The being is not so much a thing that I have, like a skill or an ability. It's not like a superpower that I can say, okay, I've got this superpower called being, because being is who we are. It's just us. If we manage to actually genuinely exist, then naturally we have this being, because that is inherent in our nature. But we have to slowly and painfully cultivate that being. And even saying cultivate might be giving slightly the wrong impression, because we can't deliberately grow it, but we can get the conditions right so that nature can grow it. So you can say cultivating, as long as you realize that all we can do is just keep the weeds away and, do a bit of watering or whatever. But nature will do the work if we have the right conditions. And being has nothing to do with solving problems, because it doesn't need to solve problems. It's bigger than the problem. It's bigger than all of the problems. Whatever the problems, being is bigger than that. And so it's a perception that, well, okay, this is a problem, this is a difficulty, but being is bigger than that. So that's where what we like to call resilience comes from. Even though we imagine resilience as a kind of a trick, a kind of thing that I learned from an expert and do the thing that they said, and that'll help me not freak out. Anything I do to deliberately not freak out is freaking out. So when I engage in my strategies, my mental health strategies, or whatever the hell it is that I've been taught, that's freaking out. It's a more disciplined, organized, maybe intelligently put together type of freaking out, but it is freaking out. Because if I had enough being, I would not need to try and change things in the way that I feel that I have to change them. So whenever there is this word, I have to, or I can't, it's because we don't have enough being. So we're driven by the deterministic power of what we need to do in order to keep ourselves afloat or keep ourselves from cracking up. So it's we're controlled by our need to control, and that's the way it is when we have no being. If we have being, then that puts a very different perspective on things, because all these things which are saying to me, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, we can meet all of those impulses with a smile. It's like, no, I don't. Not an aggressive, no, I don't. I'm going to fight against you. But humorous, I just don't. That's not true. It's a bluff. So my thoughts are trying to bluff me the whole time, saying, you have to do this. Just like a government will bluff us by saying, oh, you have to vote for us and give us all these powers, because if you don't, the bad thing will happen. So the thinking mind is like a bad government. Most governments kind of bad to some extent in that way. They all like power. So this isn't at all a new idea. One of the things that Jung says about neurotic disturbances and neurotic problems is that we never solve them on their own terms. Not just sometimes we can't solve them. We can never ever solve a problem on its own terms, because when we try to solve a problem on its own terms, that's what creates the problem. And Einstein said the same thing in a slightly different field. He wasn't talking about mental health so much, probably, when he said, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created the problem. So coming back to Jung, what Jung said is that we simply outgrow the problems. So here's me at whatever age, 23, 24, whatever. I'm having huge problems. What seem to me to be problems, because that's the age I'm at and the level of development I'm at. And they're very real problems. They could push me to the edge. They could push me over the edge. To me, they are the real problems, serious problems. So now I'm not 23 or 24. A fair amount of time has passed. And so, generally speaking, you'd expect some kind of growth to take place, that maturation or whatever you want to call it. And so it's probably fair enough to say that if the same problems came along that were really terrible for me when I was 23 or 24, now I wouldn't actually notice them. I wouldn't hardly take them seriously at all. And that's not because of skills. It's not because of techniques that I've learned or information or anything like that. Because if I was, just to keep on repeating the point, using skills and techniques, etc., that would mean I am trying to solve the problem on its own terms, which would mean that I've been suckered, because that's what feeds all problems. It's like saying what feeds Satan is us fighting against Satan. Satan can't exist unless we fight against him. But we're pressurized and we're scared and we're told we have to fight against him. So we do. And once we do, we're locked into it. And we're never going to win, but we can kind of hold him back. But if we ever relax or get weak, he's going to start winning. So we're caught in this kind of stalemate. That's what fighting always does. There's no progression. It's just a stalemate. So what happens is, over so many years, we become a different person. We become different. But more than that, we become different in the sense that if we're growing, and there's no guarantee that we will grow, lots of people don't. But if we do grow, then when the problem comes, we're bigger than the problem. We're bigger than we used to be. The problem used to be the same size as us because it was a reflection of us, and we were the reflection of the problem, and the problem was a reflection of us. It's really us in disguise, and we're fighting ourselves, which ain't going to work out. But now we're not. We're above that problem. The problem doesn't exist. It only exists for that particular naive way or immature way of looking at the world. The problem is that naive, immature way of looking at the world. So it's solved by growth, not by that naive, immature way of looking at the world, learning tricks, lots of clever tricks. But even though when we say that, it's very clear, it's fair enough. That kind of would make sense to most people, I think. But at the same time, we don't take it on board. We don't show any signs of taking it on board. The discourse in the field of mental health and the mental health conditions is all about tricks. Tricks. This trick will work. I've got a new trick. What about this trick? What about that trick? Like magnetic fields applied to certain areas of the brain. That's a trick. It's certainly not being. So instead of growing, instead of becoming bigger than the problem, so the problem no longer crushes us, we stay on the same level as the problem, but we get by with tricks. So what that means is we don't grow. We don't need to grow. So even if we have tricks, you might say, it's not that tricks never work. They do work. But by relying on the tricks, we give up our chance to develop being. We give up our chance to grow. So what this all means is that the way we have set things up is there is no growing because we put all our money on clever tricks, strategies, gimmicks. So when we look around, we can see that on the whole, we manage to cushion ourselves from the difficulties of life that other cultures, so-called what they used to call primitive cultures, or maybe they still do, don't shield themselves or insulate themselves from these difficulties so much, so they grow. And we think we're so smart because we've got all these clever tricks, but all that's happened is we never gain wisdom, which is what life is actually all about. It's no matter what we think it's about, or it's about, I want to achieve this, or I want this goal, that's all rubbish. It's pure shite. That's got nothing to do with our stupid goals. Our goals are our distraction. Life is about growth. Growth and goals don't go together because when I grow, what used to be my goal is profoundly meaningless to me. It's be like I'd be saying, what kind of an idiot was I actually thinking that was, worth putting loads of money and effort for? My goals are a projection of my current state. My goals are a projection of my ignorance, my naivety, my stupidity. That's what they are. If I were to get a bit wiser, all of these goals would disappear. If I was to get wise enough, there wouldn't be any goals at all.